This is WB Yeats. This is a representation of a fairy queen generated by AI. And what you're about to hear is the fascinating account of how WB Yeats actually ran into and spoke with a fairy queen while out on a late night stroll on an Irish beach sometime in the late 1800s. Now, if that sounds good to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. We're going to be releasing a lot more content like this in the near future, and I can't stress enough how grateful we are for your support. All right, let's get into it. Hello everyone, and welcome to the show. We have a great story for you today. It's about an encounter with the Fae, yes, the fairy folk, and it's one of my favorites. So if you're ready, you're comfortable, let's get a snack and let's get in the glow. My wife got me this. It's pretty cool. All right. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to interview a fairy queen? I mean, like an actual fairy, like one of the Fae. And if so, what kind of questions would you ask her? Well, as you're about to hear, you may not want to ask her too many questions, or you might just suffer the wrath of the Fae. Now, in today's world of cryptozoology, we have Bigfoot, we have Chupacabra, we have the Dogman, but the Fae stand out as a little bit odd even with the cryptids. Sometimes they're corporeal or physical, and they seem just as real as you and me. Other times, they're a little bit more like wisps. They're kind of ghost-like, and it's even been told that they mingle with the spirits of the dead. In a lot of encounters, for instance, the Fae are described as either dancing in a field or bathing in a stream. They seem very physical in that way. Other times, they're seen communing with the dead, so actual spirits, human spirits. They do have a magical side to them as well. I've read stories where somebody's picked up and he goes horseback riding with the Fae all night long, only to wake up and discover that he's been riding on a broom handle or the handle of an axe all night long. Stranger still is the long-held belief that the Fae will oftentimes take strangers who stray too far off the road at night. When and if the travelers are returned, there's often a case of lost time. The victim may feel like he or she's only been gone for 5 minutes, when in reality, they've been missing for 5 days. And it's no wonder that many people have made the connection between the fairy or the Fae folk and modern day alien abductions. A lot of times they're even described as the little people and are said to be about 3 feet tall, which is another comparison that you can make with the 3-foot tall grays that people so often encounter late at night. Honestly, it seems like the more I look into the encounters with the Fae, the more questions I'm left with. So what are these things? Are they spirit? Are they physical? Are they something in between? We're gonna try to nail that down today. So what would it be like to interview a queen of the Fae, face to face? Well, renowned Irish poet WB Yeats did just that. To set the scene, Yeats starts off by describing a night where he found himself near a coastline in rural Ireland, and he was strolling along the sandy shore in the company of a middle-aged man and a young girl who was a relation to the middle-aged man. No names were given. So they're walking along the coastline in the sand, and the man happens to bring up that the girl is a gifted seer. He explains that oftentimes she glimpses the dim glow of unaccountable lights moving across the field among the cattle. More than that, she oftentimes sees things that others can't. She even said that she could see some of the Fae folk sometimes, or as she called them, the forgetful people. So Yeats, who's always been fascinated with the Fae folk, was quick to just latch onto that conversation, was excited about the possibility of maybe seeing something that night. So they're just walking on the sand, enjoying their conversation, and he describes that in the midst of their hike, they approached what Yeats called a notable fairy haunt. The location included a shallow sea cave amidst shimmering black rock, and the reflection of the cave was visible in the wet sand that was lit by the moon. Now, at this point in Yeats's life, he had developed a theory as to why certain people could see things that others couldn't, be it Fae or ghost. And he was certain that it was due to a natural ability to fall into a type of waking trance, where the person would be able to pick up frequencies that aren't normally perceivable in your typical state of waking consciousness. So naturally, as they neared the dark cave, Yeats asked the girl if she could see anything, and the girl went silent. Minutes passed by, and Yeats could see that the girl was slowly falling into that waking trance in which, to quote Yeats, "The cold sea breeze no longer troubled her, nor the dull boom of the sea distracted her attention." Now, a few more minutes passed by and nothing really seemed to happen. The girl was just standing there staring off into nothingness, basically. So Yeats decided to take things into his own hands. So he cupped his hand over his mouth and he called aloud some of the names of the great fairies that he was very familiar with in his studies of traditional Irish folklore and mythology. Still nothing happened. The atmosphere was cold and silent. And just as it seemed that nothing would happen, the girl began to hear something. Now, she only heard it faintly, but what it sounded like was some strange music coming from somewhere deep inside the black rocks. A moment later, she could make out the sound of talking and laughing and people stamping their feet as if to applaud some unseen performer. Now, Yeats perked up his ears excitedly, but was unable to make anything out aside from the crashing waves and the cold breeze hissing across the Irish countryside. Now, at this point, the man that they were with had moved up further closer to the rocks to examine them. And he smiled and chuckled and started walking back towards Yeats and the girl and announced that they were going to be interrupted because he could clearly hear the sound of children laughing somewhere just on the other side of the rocks. Yeats, however, confirms that they were indeed alone this whole time. Instead, without realizing it, the man was slipping into a trance of his own, or as Yeats describes it, the spirits of the place had begun to cast their influence over him also. And the next moment, the man could also hear the music and the laughing and the stomping of feet. And to them, the girl and the man, the noise seemed to be getting louder. All at once, the girl announced that she could now see a bright light streaming out of the cave, which now seemed a lot deeper than it had before. And in the lights, she began to make out shapes and shadows playing off the wall. To her astonishment, she was soon able to see a group of little people all dressed in various colored garbs, red being the predominant color, dancing to a tune that she didn't recognize. At this point in the story, Yeats stops to quickly explain that the fairies in Ireland are sometimes the same size as we are, sometimes much bigger, and other times they're only 3 feet tall. He was once told by an old woman that lived in County Mayo that it has something to do with their eyes, and that they'll appear differently depending on who's looking at them. That's a terrifying thought. But back to the main story. Now, after a little while, the little people began to dance out onto the sand so that the young girl could clearly see them. And it was at this point that Yeats asked that she call out to the queen of the little people so that they might talk together. The girl did just that, but got no answer. Not to be discouraged, Yeats called out to the queen himself in a loud, booming voice, requesting that she please come out and speak with them. A few moments passed by, and then something odd started happening. Yeats himself started to notice a glimmer of light protruding out from the mouth of the cave. Now, I can picture his bewildered look as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Was it the reflection of the moon shining off the sand and bouncing into the cave, making it seem like there was a glimmer of light shooting out of the cave? But even as he watched and tried to make sense of it, the light grew brighter. And it wasn't long before Yeats was able to, in his own words, make out a faint gleam of golden ornaments and the shadowy blossom of dim hair. And of course, he realized that now he too was in some type of waking trance. So the light had grown bright at this time, and out of it walked a very beautiful and very tall woman. Now the woman slowly walked across the sand and approached them until she was standing like 5 or 6 feet away from the group. Yeats was super excited by all of this, of course, and having been deeply fascinated and interested in fairy societies and culture, he requested that the girl ask the queen to marshal her followers according to their natural divisions. The queen, however, did not respond. Like before, Yeats actually had to repeat the question himself. And at this, the little people began walking out of the cave and joined all of them on the sand. Yeats describes that they lined up in 4 bands. One of the bands carried some limbs of a quicken tree, and another had necklaces made up of something that resembled serpent scales. Now, Yeats could not remember what they were wearing because he was so absorbed in the gleaming visage of the woman. Now, without taking his eyes off the woman, he asked the young girl if she would ask the queen if this was the greatest of the fairy haunts in all of Ireland. To this, the queen responded, but the answer was inaudible. Neither Yeats or the girl could hear what the queen was saying. They could see that she was clearly moving her lips, but neither of them could hear anything. Yates then got an idea and asked that the young girl lay her hand upon the shoulder of the queen, hoping that this would somehow deepen their connection. And to his surprise, it worked. So the queen informed the young girl that this was not the greatest fairy haunt. In fact, there was a greater one just a little further ahead. Elated by the chance to interview the fairy queen, Yeats wasted no time in asking a number of questions. He first asked if it was true that she and her people carry away mortals, and if so, whether they put another soul in the place of the one that they had taken. The queen looked down at him and her only answer was, "We changed their bodies." Do you see now how this sounds a lot like modern day alien abduction stories, where someone is taken out of their bed at night, returned later with maybe some missing time, and the weird feeling that their bodies had been worked on while they were gone? Anyways, chilled by that answer, Yeats continued on. He then asked if any of the Fae are ever born into mortal life. Once again, her answer was short and to the point, as she simply said, yes. Yeats then asked, do I know anyone that was among your people before they were born? And the queen simply answered, you do? Who are they? Yeats asked. At this, the queen became a little bit more stern and said, it would not be lawful for you to know. Not to be deterred by this, Yeats quickly asked if her and her people were not dramatizations of our moods, or, as you might say, figments of our imagination. The seer then explained that the queen did not understand that question, but instead says that her people are much like human beings and do most of the things that human beings do. Next, Yeats then asked her a question as to her nature and her purpose in the universe, but these questions also seemed to puzzle the queen. At this point, it was clear that the queen was beginning to lose patience with them and their conversation. She bent forward and with her finger began to write something in the air, and Yeats explained that he could read it just as clearly as if the queen had written it on the sand beneath their feet. And what she wrote was this. It was a short warning, and it said, be careful and do not seek to know too much about us. With that, she turned and, followed closely by her people, walked back into the sea cave. The light began to grow dim again until finally nothing was left but the soft light of the moon. After a few moments, the young girl awoke out of her trance and once again felt the chill of the coastal wind and began to shiver. Now, if you're interested in reading the story yourself, you can check it out. It was W.B. Yeats' The Celtic Twilight. You can find the story in there. That is a book basically of short stories with W.B. Yeats traveling around the countryside in Ireland, speaking to really people in the rural countryside that still believe in fairies and just cataloging their stories. It's a great read. I highly suggest it, but I hope that you enjoyed this story as much as I did. And if you did, also check out our podcast, Firelight Vibes. It's on Apple and Spotify and really anywhere that you can find podcasts. We have real people come on and share their real encounters with the unexplained and the supernatural, be it cryptid, ghost, alien, what have you. So if you're really into this stuff, be sure to check it out. Anyways, thank you all and have a great day.